In this video, I want to share some observations I made while reading poetry by Samuel Johnson. The book I have is Oxford Authors, a critical edition of the major works. The poetry in here is only a selection of his poetry. It's only about 40 pages, while the rest is prose. London is a long poem. It's really a tirade against certain behaviors at court that he thinks are deplorable. One behavior he describes as flattery. Johnson comments that the French are really good at it, and that explains why they're so good at acting. At the paragraph starting at line 132, he has a catalogue of images that brilliantly show the stupid emptiness of flattery. Besides, with justice, this discerning age admires their wondrous talents for the stage. Well may they venture on the mimic's art, who play from morn to night a borrowed part, practiced their master's notions to embrace, repeat his maxims, and reflect his face, with every wild absurdity comply, and view each object with another's eye, to shake with laughter ere the jest they hear, to pour at will the counterfeited tear, and as their patron hints the cold or heat, to shake in dog days, in December sweat. Isn't that last part genius? Even if it's hot, in order to please his patron, the flatterer will deny the heat and shiver, and if it's freezing outside, if his patron suggests it's warm, the flatterer sweats. It's a concrete image that's absurd, and therefore shows the nature of flattery in vividly unflattering terms. One line I like is from a translation of an ode by Horace. It's from Odes, Roman numerals 2, or II.20. There is an image of the poet scorning the world and flying like a bird. Quote, "I spring and cut with joy the wondering skies," end quote. I don't know how much we have to credit Horace for this, but Johnson's choice of cut is excellent, I think. The bird makes a clean, straight line up the sky, as if cutting it in two, and this shows the bird's rocket-like ascension, and that shows us how glad the bird is, or the poet, in not having to deal with what it doesn't like to deal with down below. In another translation of an ode, this one also by Horace, it's from Odes, Roman numeral 4.7, the speaker wonders whether reincarnation or rebirth is possible. And this image I really find fascinating. Quote, "Who knows if Jove, who counts our score, will toss us in a morning more?" End quote. Again, I don't know how much credit Horace should get for that, but toss is perfect in my mind because when you toss something, it makes a light, gentle arc, maybe as light and gentle as a soul's arc through the air would be if it were possible to throw one. It also highlights the omnipotence of such a God that's able to put souls back on earth. To toss something is typically more of an easy action, maybe even careless, and that highlights the insignificance of one human soul compared to Jove. And then it's tossed in a morning, a picture of the soul being thrown down, mingling with sunbeams and landing back again on earth with the sun's fresh light of a new day. That image is just absolutely gorgeous. I was struck a few times by Johnson's technique of manipulating the normal sentence structure. One example is at the beginning of the third verse paragraph in the poem London. It's line 19. The speaker is one of the group of friends who is saying goodbye to someone who's leaving London for good. The person leaving is named Thales. Before I read it, wherry, W-H-E-R-R-Y, is a kind of rowboat. Here's the quote. "While Thales waits, the wherry that contains of dissipated wealth the small remains, on Thames's banks in silent thought we stood, where Greenwich smiles upon the silver flood," end quote. The phrase, "the wherry that contains of dissipated wealth the small remains," would be, if it were normal word order, "the wherry that contains the small remains of dissipated wealth." So you see, he simply switches the prepositional phrase with the object of that clause. Doing something like this might create light tension, since we were expecting an object, the remains, after the verb, but it's quick enough and clear enough so that there can't be any confusion, and it's interesting. In verse paragraph 6, the speaker is talking about activities that Thales is happily leaving behind forever. Other people who still live in London can do these things now, not he, is the idea. The quote is a little phrase. Let such raise palaces and manors buy. Manors here being big house, and such here stands for the people who are still in London. This phrase is a list of two things, two verb-object pairs, raise palaces and buy manors. But when we get to the second verb-object pair, the order is reversed. We have a syntactical inversion, and the statement is basically, let such manors buy. I think that's an interesting way to treat parallel construction. It adds a little interest to it. A similar example is in verse paragraph 9, where Thales himself is talking about how unpleasant it was to pursue his career in London. The quote is, well may they rise while I live unregarded, unlamented die, end quote. Live unregarded, unlamented die, just that part. It's the same procedure as before with the verb-object pair, except here it's verb-adverb. The second of the two is in reverse order. In verse paragraph 21, we have another parallel construction, but here with elided words, words not there that are understood to be there. Thales is talking now about what it's like watching merit, ability, virtue, competence be trampled by popular attraction to, in his opinion, baser and crasser things, and then becoming a sort of castaway in that flood. Here's the quote. Then through the world a wretched vagrant roam, for where can starving merit find a home? In vain your mournful narrative disclose, while all neglect and most insult your woes, end quote. The phrase I want to look at here is, while all neglect and most insult your woes, the last line. Here there's a parallel construction which we could expand to, while all neglect your woes, and while most insult your woes. But notice in the original how in the first part with the verb neglect, the object woes is missing. We don't know what is to be neglected yet. We only find out in the second part that it's woes. I think this causes a little pleasant tension. It's tense obviously because we need to know neglect what, and then we're satisfied because we find out soon enough what that is. To use musical terminology, the dissonance is resolved. Something struck me about how Johnson places caesuras or grammatical pauses within the pentameter line. Here's a passage from London. Has heaven reserved, in pity to the poor, no pathless waste or undiscovered shore, no secret island in the boundless main, no peaceful desert yet unclaimed by Spain? Quick, let us rise, the happy seats explore, and bear oppression's insolence no more. This mournful truth is everywhere confessed, slow rise is worth by poverty depressed. But here more slow, where all are slaves to gold, where looks are merchandise and smiles are sold, where won by bribes, by flatteries implored, the groom retails the favor of his lord. In this passage, with almost no exception, in each line there is either a grammatical pause at the end of the line or after the 2-beat position within the line, leaving 3 beats to go. For example, has heaven reserved, in pity to the poor, no pathless waste or undiscovered shore, no secret island in the boundless main, no peaceful desert yet unclaimed by Spain? Quick let us rise, the happy seats explore, and bear oppression's insolence no more. This mournful truth is everywhere confessed, slow rise is worth by poverty depressed. Of course, caesuras can happen anywhere in the line, but if they happen at the end, it sounds rounded, complete. But this can be monotonous if every line is like that. But there's another type of line that still is stable. If we have a line like this, 2 beats then 3, we have a sort of rise, then a rounded decline, and then a rise that's longer than the first rise. I think it's good that the part that's longer is at the end. It sounds stable. And I think that's what contributes to this passage's relative sweetness. The sense rounds to completion at stable positions. It's definitely a concentrated amount of these two types, and maybe doing this the whole poem would be monotonous. However, I think it's not monotonous here due to there being no definite pattern of, say, line with 5, line with 2 and 3, line with 5, line with 2 and 3. The 5 lines and the 2 and 3 lines happen randomly. It's mixed. I'm trying to say with this comment that Having an ear to where the sense cadences within iambic pentameter is something to strive for, because you can achieve certain definite effects with how regularly those cadences occur. In this book, there is a single scene from Johnson's play Irene. It's Act 2, Scene 7. In this scene, Mohammed is trying to convince Irene to marry him and become queen. She doesn't want such political power, and she tells him, after he's tried to convince her a while, "Forbear, O do not urge me to my ruin." And Mohammed responds, "To state and power I court thee, not to ruin. Smile on my wishes and command the globe." End quote. That phrase, "smile on my wishes," is exemplary of Johnson's technique of associating the abstract or the mental with the concrete. The essence of Mohammed's response is, if you find what I'm offering to be good, if you agree, then you'll have the chance to rule the world. Finding something agreeable or good per se is a mental state which can't be seen, but Johnson writes, "Smile on my wishes." He's using a concrete action to stand for an invisible mental process, and we have no problem seeing how smiling on something is like finding something agreeable, because we do smile when thinking about things we like or at people we like. It's a very compact moment, and most importantly, in my opinion, it's visual. Here's another example from the poem Prologue, spoken at the opening of the theater in Drury Lane. At the beginning, talking about Shakespeare, Johnson writes, "His powerful strokes presiding truth impressed." End quote. We have a high-level concept, truth, acting like a judge, presiding, so watching and judging. And not only is this judge, truth, forming a judgment, he's impressed at the judgment he arrives at. If Johnson had said this straight, one formulation could have been, people who believe that art should be true to nature are impressed by Shakespeare's works. Now, I can't say I know exactly what Johnson means with truth. I assume he means according to nature, so maybe he's alluding to Shakespeare's characters being so believable as real human beings. I can't say for sure. However, whatever he means, this phrase is so amazingly compact and strikingly visual. Just 3 words, presiding, truth, and impressed, gives us the whole meaning, but with words that put a real picture in our minds. I'd like to mention also something that highlights Johnson's cleverness, or even genius. He wrote a 10-line poem called Verses for Baretti. Apparently at the time there was a poet who was known for writing improvisatory verse. So Johnson's poem here is about the practice of writing improvisatory or extemporaneous verse, and according to the very enlightening note at the back of the book, the poem was itself written extemporaneously. The argument goes basically, I too can write improvisatory verse, but such verses are inherently not as good as works that grow slowly with editing and mulling over the ideas. So let me read it. Verses for Baretti. At sight of sparkling bowls or beauteous dames, when fondness melts me, or when wine inflames, I too can feel the rapture, fierce and strong. I too can pour the extemporary song. But though the numbers for a moment please, though music thrills, or sudden sallies seize, yet lay the sonnet for an hour aside, its charms are fled, and all its powers destroyed. What soon is perfect, soon alike is past. That slowly grows, which must forever last. So for me, the fact that these are rhyming couplets that convey a little argument, and that these lines were written on the fly, is impressive enough. But the poem itself is an example of its own subject, an extemporaneous poem about extemporaneous poems. And the poem's argument is, look, extemporaneous poems can't by their nature be that great because you need to think about it more to make it perfect. But I can't say what's lacking in this poem. This is a good poem in my estimation, technically. And it's a little insightful. It's not the most profound, but it's not inane. It's a clear and well-reasoned position. I think Johnson is jabbing his own argument in the ribs, as if he's saying extemporaneous poems aren't really that good, but this one is. Yes, part of the fun of this poem is knowing his biography, because we can't know certainly from the poem itself, I think, that he improvised it. Even the line, "I too can pour the extemporary song," says only he's able to, but doesn't say that right now he's doing it, although perhaps it could be inferred. But I admire him for his technical competence, being able to whip off something like this, and for the levels of complexity that this poem is what the poem criticizes, yet possibly escapes criticism by being itself so well done. That's really clever. That's all I have for now about Samuel Johnson's poetry. Till next time.